The alarm clock buzzed at 4 in the morning. Helen Park opened her eyes in the darkness of her small bedroom. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the quiet of the world outside. No cars, no voices, just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She had been waking up at this hour for 23 years. Her body knew the routine even before her mind caught up. Feet on the cold floor, slippers, a splash of water on her face, coffee brewing while she dressed in her gray uniform. Helen was 61 years old. Her hair had turned silver a long time ago, and she kept it tied back in a simple bun. Her hands were rough from years of work, and her knees ached when the weather turned cold. But every morning, without fail, she got up and did what needed to be done. She worked at the Westfield Community Center. It was the biggest building in town, a place where people came together for all kinds of events. Weddings happened there. So did funerals, town meetings, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, charity dinners, and holiday celebrations. If something important was happening in Westfield, it happened at the community center, and Helen was the one who made sure the building was ready. She arrived before anyone else, usually around 5 in the morning. The parking lot was always empty at that hour. She unlocked the heavy front doors with the same key she had used for over 2 decades. The metal was worn smooth from her fingers. Inside, the building was dark and silent. Helen moved through the hallways with ease. She knew every corner, every light switch, every squeaky floorboard. She could walk the entire building with her eyes closed. Her first task was always the same. She turned on the lights in the main hall and checked the floors. If there had been an event the night before, there was usually a mess waiting for her. Spilled drinks, crumbs under the tables, napkins stuffed into corners. Sometimes people left behind jackets or phones or jewelry. Helen cleaned it all. She mopped the floors until they shined. She wiped down the tables and stacked the chairs. She emptied the trash cans and replaced the liners. She scrubbed the bathrooms until they smelled fresh. She polished the mirrors and refilled the soap dispensers. By the time the first staff members arrived around 8 or 9, the building looked perfect, as if no one had ever made a mess. As if the floors had cleaned themselves. That was the thing about Helen's work. When she did it well, no one noticed. People walked through the doors and saw a clean building. They never thought about how it got that way. They never wondered who had been there before them, working in the silence of the early morning. Helen had learned to accept this a long time ago. She did not do her job for praise. She did it because it needed to be done. And she was good at it. There was a kind of pride in that, even if no one else saw it. But sometimes, late at night when she was alone, she wondered what it would feel like to be seen, just once. Helen's life had not been easy. She had grown up poor, the daughter of immigrants who worked long hours at a laundry business. She had married young, to a kind man named David, who drove trucks for a living. They had 2 children together, a boy and a girl. Life was simple but good. Then David got sick. It started with a cough that would not go away. The doctors found something in his lungs. Within a year, he was gone. Helen was 34 years old, with 2 children in elementary school and a stack of medical bills she could not pay. She took the job at the community center because it was the only one available. The pay was not much, but it was steady. She worked mornings, afternoons, and sometimes nights. She missed school plays and soccer games. She missed helping with homework. But she made sure there was food on the table and a roof over their heads. Her children grew up. Her son became an engineer. Her daughter became a nurse. They both moved to other cities, started their own families. Helen was proud of them. She had done her job as a mother, just like she did her job at the community center, quietly, without complaint. Now she lived alone in the same small house she had shared with David. The children called on weekends when they remembered. They visited on holidays when they could. Helen did not blame them for being busy. That was life. People moved on, but the loneliness was real. It sat with her at the kitchen table in the evenings. It followed her through the empty hallways of the community center. It whispered to her that she did not matter, that she was invisible, that the world would keep spinning whether she was there or not. Helen pushed those thoughts away. She had work to do. The Westfield Community Center was getting ready for its biggest event of the year. The annual Appreciation Gala was a tradition that had been going on for decades. Every year, the town gathered to honor its local heroes, firefighters who had saved lives, teachers who had inspired students, business owners who had donated to charity, volunteers who had given their time. Helen had seen hundreds of people receive awards over the years. She had set up the chairs for their ceremonies. She had cleaned up after their celebrations. She had watched from the back of the room as they gave speeches and wiped away tears of gratitude. No one had ever called her name. She did not expect them to. Cleaning was not the kind of work that got you on a stage. It was not the kind of work that made people clap. It was the kind of work that happened in the background, early in the morning or late at night, when no one was watching. Still, there were moments when Helen felt a small ache in her chest. She would be mopping the floor after a big event, surrounded by empty chairs where important people had sat. And she would think about all the years she had given to this place. All the hours, all the sweat, all the invisible labor that kept the building running. Did anyone know her name? She had been introduced to the staff once, years ago. But people came and went. New managers arrived. Old ones retired. The young people who worked the front desk barely looked at her when she passed by. They were busy with their phones, their conversations, their own lives. Helen was just the cleaning lady. A gray uniform moving through the hallways. A mop and a bucket. A face that blended into the walls. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself that her worth was not measured by whether people remembered her name. She told herself that God saw her work, even if no one else did. But deep down, in a place she rarely visited, Helen wished that someone would see her. Just once. Just for a moment. She had no idea that her moment was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything. The night of the gala arrived faster than Helen expected. She had spent the last 2 days preparing the main hall. Every chair had to be perfectly aligned. Every table had to be covered with a crisp white cloth. Every centerpiece had to be placed just right. She had polished the floors 3 times. She had cleaned the windows until they sparkled. She had checked the bathrooms every few hours to make sure they stayed spotless. This was the biggest event of the year, and Helen wanted everything to be perfect. By 6 in the evening, the guests started arriving. Helen watched from a corner near the kitchen doors as they walked in. Women in elegant dresses, men in dark suits, children running between tables while their parents called after them. The main hall could hold 300 people, and tonight it was full. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. Waiters moved through the crowd, carrying trays of food. A band played soft music on a small stage near the back. Helen stayed out of sight. She wore her usual gray uniform, the same one she wore every day. Her hair was pulled back in its simple bun. She carried a small cloth in her pocket, ready to wipe up any spills. This was her place during events. In the background, near the exits, ready to clean, ready to help, but never part of the celebration itself. She did not mind. She had done this hundreds of times before. She knew how these nights worked. The guests would eat and drink and laugh. The mayor would give a speech. Awards would be handed out. People would clap and cheer. And then, when it was all over, Helen would stay behind to clean up the mess. That was her role. That was her life. Around 8 o'clock, the mayor stepped onto the main stage. He was a tall man, with gray hair and a friendly smile. He had been the mayor of Westfield for almost 15 years. Everyone in town knew him. He tapped the microphone and waited for the room to quiet down. "Good evening, everyone," he said. Welcome to the 32nd Annual Appreciation Gala. The crowd applauded. Helen leaned against the wall near the kitchen doors, watching from a distance. The mayor began his speech. He talked about the history of Westfield. He talked about the importance of community. He talked about the people who made the town a better place. Then the awards began. First, a firefighter was called to the stage. He had rescued a family from a burning house last summer. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. He accepted his award with humble words and tears in his eyes. Next, a teacher was honored. She had started a reading program for children who were struggling in school. Parents stood up to thank her. She covered her face with her hands and cried. Then a local business owner received an award for donating thousands of dollars to the town's food bank. He brought his whole family on stage with him. His grandchildren held the plaque. While everyone clapped, Helen watched each person walk to the stage. She saw their faces light up when their names were called. She saw the pride in their eyes. She saw the love from the crowd. She felt happy for them. These were good people who had done good things. They deserved to be recognized, but there was also a small ache in her chest. A quiet feeling she tried to push away. 23 years. She had given 23 years to this building. She had cleaned up after every event, including this one. She had arrived before dawn and stayed after midnight. She had scrubbed floors and washed windows and emptied trash cans while the rest of the town slept. No one had ever called her name. She shook her head and told herself to stop. This was not about her. Tonight was about the people being honored. She had no right to feel sorry for herself. She turned to walk back into the kitchen. There was work to do. Dishes to wash. Tables to wipe. She would keep busy. That always helped. But before she could take a step, something happened. The mayor's voice echoed through the hall. And now, we have a very special award to present. Helen paused. She turned back toward the stage. The mayor was holding a small envelope. He opened it slowly, reading the paper inside. A strange look crossed his face. It was almost like surprise. This nomination came from someone in our community, he said. Someone who wanted to recognize a person that most of us have never noticed. A person who has served this town quietly, faithfully, for over 2 decades. Helen felt her heart beat a little faster. She did not know why. The mayor looked up from the paper. His eyes scanned the room. Helen Park, he said. Would you please come to the stage? For a moment, Helen did not move. She was not sure she had heard correctly. Her name? On that stage? In front of all these people? The crowd murmured. Heads turned. People looked around, confused. Who was Helen Park? No one seemed to know. A waiter near Helen nudged her arm. I think he means you, he whispered. Helen's legs felt weak. Her hands started to tremble. This had to be a mistake. She was just the cleaning lady. She did not belong on that stage. But the mayor said her name again. Helen Park, are you here tonight? Slowly, Helen stepped forward. The crowd parted as she walked through the tables. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. She could hear the whispers. Who is she? I don't recognize her. Is she new? Helen kept her head down. Her worn shoes squeaked against the floor she had polished that morning. Her gray uniform stood out against the elegant dresses and dark suits around her. She had never felt so small. When she reached the stage, the mayor extended his hand and helped her up the steps. He was smiling, but Helen could barely see him. Her vision was blurry. Her heart was pounding in her ears. She stood in the center of the stage, under the bright lights, facing a sea of strangers. The mayor spoke into the microphone. Helen Park has worked at this community center for 23 years. She arrives before any of us wake up. She stays long after we go home. She cleans our floors, sets up our chairs, and makes sure this building is ready for every event we hold. He paused and looked at Helen. Most of us have never spoken to her. Most of us don't even know her name. But tonight, someone wanted to change that. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She did not know who had nominated her. She did not know why. All she knew was that she was standing on a stage where she did not belong, in front of people who had never seen her. The mayor handed her a small plaque. It was the Community Spirit Award. Her name was engraved on the front. "Helen," the mayor said gently. "Would you like to say a few words?" The room fell silent. Helen looked at the microphone in the mayor's hand. She had never held one before. She had never spoken in front of a crowd. She had spent her whole life avoiding attention, staying invisible, doing her work without asking for anything in return. But something stirred inside her, a feeling she could not explain, a voice that told her this moment mattered. She reached out and took the microphone. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was barely a whisper, but she had something to say. And once she said it, nothing in Westfield would ever be the same. Helen stood under the bright lights, holding the microphone with both hands. Her fingers were trembling. She could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes pressing down on her. The room was completely silent. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the children had stopped running between tables. Helen looked out at the crowd. She saw faces she did not recognize. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, teachers, important people. People who had built things and saved lives and made a difference in the world. And here she was, a cleaning lady in a gray uniform, standing on a stage where she did not belong. Her throat felt dry. Her mind went blank. For a terrible moment, she thought she might faint right there in front of everyone. But then she took a breath. A deep, slow breath. And she thought about all the mornings she had spent alone in this building. All the floors she had mopped. All the chairs she had arranged. All the years she had given to a place that never gave anything back. She thought about her husband, David, who had worked hard every day until his body gave out. She thought about her children, who had grown up watching her sacrifice everything for them. She thought about all the people like her, all over the world, who did invisible work that no one noticed. And suddenly, the words came. "I don't know why I'm up here," Helen said softly. Her voice cracked a little, but she kept going. "I'm not a hero. I didn't save anyone's life. I didn't start a charity or donate a lot of money. I just cleaned this building." She paused. The silence in the room was so thick, she could almost touch it. "I've worked here for 23 years, she continued. "I set up the chairs for events like this one. And when everyone goes home, I stay behind to clean up." Helen looked down at the plaque in her hand. Her name was engraved on it in gold letters. It was the first time she had ever seen her name written so beautifully. "Most of you don't know me," she said. "And that's okay. I'm not the kind of person people remember. I don't wear nice clothes or give speeches. I just do my job and go home." She lifted her eyes and looked at the crowd again. Something shifted inside her. A feeling she had kept buried for a very long time was rising to the surface. "But I want to tell you something," she said. "Something I've been thinking about for years." The room seemed to lean forward. People who had been looking at their phones put them down. Conversations that had been starting in the back stopped. Everyone was listening. Helen swallowed hard. This was the moment. She did not know if she had the courage to say what she wanted to say. But she had come this far. She could not turn back now. "Every day, I see people walk through these doors," she said. "They come for meetings and parties and celebrations. They walk past me like I'm not there. They never look at me. They never say hello. To them, I'm just part of the building." Her voice grew a little stronger. "And I understand. I really do. People are busy. They have their own lives, their own problems. They don't have time to notice someone like me." She paused and took another breath. "But here's the thing. I'm not the only one. There are people like me everywhere. The janitor who cleans your office at night. The cashier who rings up your groceries. The bus driver who takes your kids to school. The cook who makes your food at the restaurant. The security guard who stands at the door for hours. Helen's voice began to shake with emotion. These people are invisible, just like me. They work hard every single day, and no one sees them. No one knows their names. No one asks how they're doing. They go home at night feeling like they don't matter, like they could disappear and nobody would notice. A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. "I know how that feels," she said quietly. The room was completely still. Helen could see some people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others had tears in their eyes. A woman in the front row was covering her mouth with her hand. Helen looked at the plaque again. Then she looked back at the crowd. "I don't need this award," she said. "I really don't. I didn't do anything special. I just showed up and did my job. That's all." She held up the plaque and shook her head gently. "But if it's okay with all of you, I'd like to ask for something else instead. Something that doesn't cost any money. Something that won't take much time." The mayor, who was standing beside her, nodded encouragingly. He looked moved by her words. Helen took one more breath. This was it. The simple request. She had been building toward her whole life without even knowing it. "I'd like to ask everyone here to do one thing," she said. "Just one small thing." She looked out at the crowd, meeting their eyes one by one. "Learn the name of one person who serves you." The words hung in the air like a bell that had just been rung. "That's all I'm asking," Helen continued. "Just one name. The person who cleans your office. The person who delivers your mail. The person who makes your coffee every morning. Learn their name. Say hello to them. Ask them how their day is going." Her voice broke, but she pushed through, because sometimes being seen is the only thing a person needs to keep going. She stopped. The microphone felt heavy in her hands. She did not know if she had said too much or not enough. She did not know if people understood what she meant. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room was frozen. Helen felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. Maybe she had made a fool of herself. Maybe she should have just said thank you and walked off the stage like a normal person. But then something changed. A man in the middle of the room started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Another person joined him, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. 300 people were clapping. Not politely, but with real feeling. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were nodding their heads like they had just heard something they needed to hear. Helen stood there, stunned. She had expected silence. She had expected confusion. She had expected people to look at her like she was strange. But this was something else entirely. The applause went on and on. It washed over her like a wave. For the first time in 23 years, Helen did not feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt heard. She felt like she mattered. The mayor put his hand on her shoulder. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you." Helen could not speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had made a simple request. Just a few words. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. But somehow, those words had reached into the hearts of everyone in the room. And what happened next would prove that her request was not just heard. It was felt, and it would change Westfield forever. The applause slowly faded. People returned to their seats. But something in the room had changed. The air felt different, heavier, like everyone was carrying something they had not been carrying before. Helen stepped back from the microphone. Her legs were shaking. She wanted to leave the stage, to disappear, back into the shadows where she belonged. But before she could move, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Wait." Helen turned. A woman in the front row was standing up. She was middle-aged, dressed in a dark blue gown, with silver earrings that caught the light. Her eyes were red and wet with tears. The woman walked toward the stage. She did not ask for permission. She did not wait for the mayor to invite her. She just walked up the steps and stood next to Helen. "May I say something?" she asked, her voice trembling. The mayor looked surprised, but he nodded and handed her the microphone. The woman turned to face the crowd. She took a moment to collect herself. Then, she looked at Helen. I don't know you, she said. I've probably walked past you 100 times in this building. Maybe more. And I never once stopped to say hello. She wiped a tear from her cheek. But I remember something. It was about 6 months ago. My mother had just passed away. We held her memorial service here, in this hall. I was carrying her ashes in a small box, and I could barely see through my tears. The room was silent. Everyone was listening. When I walked through the front doors, I almost dropped the box. My hands were shaking so badly. And then someone appeared beside me. A woman, in a gray uniform. She didn't say anything. She just held the door open and nodded at me. Like she understood. The woman turned to Helen. Her voice cracked. That was you, wasn't it? Helen's eyes widened. She remembered that day. She remembered the woman with the small box. The tears on her face. The way she had been struggling to hold everything together. Helen had not thought twice about holding the door. It was just what you did. She nodded slowly. The woman let out a small sob. I never thanked you. I never even looked back. I was so lost in my own grief that I didn't see you. But you saw me. You saw me when I needed to be seen. She reached out and took Helen's hand. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for that small moment of kindness. Helen could not speak. Tears were streaming down her face. She squeezed the woman's hand and nodded. The woman returned to her seat. But before anyone could process what had just happened, another person stood up. It was a teenage boy. Maybe 16 or 17 years old. He was wearing a suit that looked a little too big for him, like he had borrowed it from his father. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, and he looked nervous. Can I say something too? He asked. The mayor gestured for him to come forward. The boy walked to the stage slowly. He did not take the microphone. He just stood near the edge and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. There's this lady who works in my school cafeteria, he said. I don't know her name. I never asked. But every day, when I go through the lunch line, she gives me extra food. She doesn't say anything about it. She just puts a little more on my plate and smiles at me. He paused. His voice got quieter. She doesn't know this. But some days, that's the only real meal I get. My family doesn't have a lot of money. Sometimes there's nothing at home, but she always makes sure I have enough to eat. The room was completely still. A few people wiped their eyes. I never thanked her, the boy said. I was too embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know that I needed help. But listening to this lady tonight made me realize something. He looked at Helen. That cafeteria worker sees me. She doesn't make a big deal about it. She doesn't tell anyone. She just helps. And I've been too proud to even learn her name. He took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I'm going to thank her. And I'm going to ask her what her name is. The crowd erupted in applause. The boy blushed and hurried back to his seat. But the moment had already taken hold. Something was happening in that room. Something unplanned and unexpected. One by one, people began to stand. A business owner admitted that he had never spoken to the security guard who had protected his building for 6 years. He had walked past him every single day without a word. A young mother confessed that she had never asked the daycare worker about her life. The woman who cared for her children 5 days a week was a stranger to her. A retired doctor stood up and said that he had spent 40 years working in a hospital, but he could not remember the name of a single janitor. Not one. A teacher from the local high school realized, out loud, in front of everyone, that she had never once asked the school custodian how he was doing. She had learned that night that he had been a professor in his home country before he came to America. He had a doctorate, and she had treated him like furniture. Each confession was like a stone dropping into still water. The ripples spread across the room, touching everyone. Helen stood on the stage, watching it all unfold. She had not expected this. She had only asked people to learn one name. She had not asked them to confess their failures or share their guilt. But that is what was happening. Her simple request had opened something, a door that had been closed for a long time. And now, all these feelings were pouring out. The gala had stopped being a gala. There were no more awards, no more speeches from the mayor. The band had stopped playing. The waiters had stopped serving. Everyone was focused on what was happening in the center of the room. People who had never spoken to each other were introducing themselves. Guests were shaking hands with the servers who had been walking among them all night. A woman in an expensive dress was hugging a young man who worked in the kitchen. She had learned that his name was Thomas, and that he was saving money to go to college. Helen watched a businessman approach one of the janitors who had been cleaning up near the back. They talked for several minutes. The businessman listened carefully, nodding his head. When they finished, he shook the janitor's hand with both of his own. It was like the walls had come down. The invisible barriers between people were crumbling. For one night, everyone was equal. Everyone was seen. Helen felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hope. Maybe the world was not as cold as she had thought. Maybe people just needed a reminder. Maybe they had forgotten how to see each other. And all it took was someone brave enough to ask. The mayor returned to the stage. He looked out at the crowd with wonder in his eyes. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said. "I've seen a lot of galas, a lot of awards, a lot of speeches. But I've never seen anything like this." He turned to Helen. "You didn't just give a speech tonight. You gave us a mirror. And I think a lot of us didn't like what we saw." He paused. "But that's a good thing, because now we can change." Helen smiled through her tears. She had come to this gala, expecting to clean up after everyone else. She had expected to be invisible. Like always. Instead, she had started something, and it was only the beginning. The night of the gala ended differently than any gala before it. People did not rush to their cars. They did not check their phones or complain about the parking. They lingered. They talked. They hugged strangers they had just met. Helen stayed until the very end. But for the first time in 23 years, she was not cleaning. She was surrounded by people who wanted to speak with her. They shook her hand. They thanked her. They told her stories about the invisible people in their own lives. When she finally left the building that night, the parking lot was almost empty. The stars were bright above her. The air was cool and still. Helen sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine. She looked at the plaque on the seat beside her. The Community Spirit Award. Her name in gold letters. She did not feel like a hero. She still felt like the same woman who had woken up at 4 in the morning for the past 2 decades. But something had shifted inside her. A weight she had been carrying for years felt a little lighter. She drove home through the quiet streets of Westfield. The houses were dark. The town was asleep. But Helen had a feeling that when everyone woke up tomorrow, things would be different. And she was right. In the days that followed, something strange started happening in Westfield. It began small. A few people posted about the gala on social media. They shared what Helen had said. They talked about the confessions, the tears, the moment when the whole room had changed. The posts spread quickly. People who had not been at the gala started reading about it. They shared it with their friends. Within a week, Helen's story had reached thousands of people. But it was not just online. Real changes were happening in the town. The teenager who had spoken about the cafeteria worker kept his promise. He went to school the next day and found her in the lunch line. Her name was Mrs. Gonzalez. She had 3 children and a husband who worked at a factory. When the boy thanked her and asked about her life, she started crying. No student had ever done that before. The businessman who had shaken hands with the janitor at the gala did something unexpected. He learned that the janitor had been struggling to pay his rent. Without telling anyone, the businessman paid 3 months of rent for him. He did not want recognition. He just wanted to help. The teacher who had ignored the school custodian for years invited him to speak to her class. He told the students about his life in another country, about the university where he had taught, about the war that had forced him to leave everything behind. The students listened with wide eyes. Some of them cried. That day, they learned that every person has a story worth hearing. All across Westfield, people started doing what Helen had asked. They learned names. They said hello. They asked questions they had never asked before. The owner of a coffee shop started putting up photos of her employees behind the counter, along with short stories about their lives. Customers began calling the workers by name. Tips went up. Smiles became more common. A local church started a program called See Someone Sunday. Every week, members of the congregation would choose one invisible person in their lives and do something kind for them. Write a note. Bring a gift. Simply say thank you. The mayor declared an official holiday. He called it Recognition Day. Once a year, the town would gather to honor the people who served behind the scenes. Janitors, bus drivers, dishwashers, mail carriers, crossing guards. The people who kept the world running, but never got the credit. Helen watched all of this happen with quiet amazement. She had not planned any of it. She had only asked one question. She had only made one request. And somehow, it had grown into something much bigger than she ever imagined. But the biggest change was in Helen herself. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. When she walked through the community center now, people stopped to talk to her. They knew her name. They asked about her day. They remembered things she had told them. The young staff members who used to ignore her now waved and smiled when she passed. Children from the local schools came to visit her. They had heard her story from their teachers. They wanted to meet the woman who had changed their town. Helen would sit with them in the main hall and tell them about her life, about her husband, about her children, about all the mornings she had spent alone in this building, wondering if anyone noticed. The children listened carefully. And when they left, many of them made promises. They would learn the names of the people who served them. They would say, "Thank you." They would see the invisible. One afternoon, about 6 months after the gala, Helen received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman in another state. She had read about Helen's story online and wanted to share something. The woman wrote that she worked as a housekeeper at a hotel. For 15 years, she had cleaned rooms without anyone ever learning her name. Guests walked past her like she was part of the furniture. She had started to believe that she did not matter. But then she read about Helen. She read about the simple request, and something inside her changed. She started holding her head a little higher. She started believing that her work had value, even if no one said so. And one day, a guest actually stopped and asked her name. It was a small moment, but to her, it meant everything. The letter ended with these words: "Thank you for reminding me that I am not invisible. Thank you for giving me hope." Helen read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a small box on her dresser. It was the first of many letters she would receive. People from all over the country wrote to her. They shared their stories. They thanked her for speaking up. They told her that her words had changed their lives. Helen kept working at the community center. She still arrived early. She still mopped the floors and cleaned the bathrooms. Her hands still ached, and her knees still hurt when the weather turned cold. But now, when she worked, she did not feel alone. 3 years later, Helen decided it was time to retire. She was 64 years old. Her body was tired. She wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren, to visit her son and daughter in their faraway cities, to rest after a lifetime of labor. On her last day, the community center held a small gathering in her honor. It was not a gala. There were no fancy dresses or expensive suits, just the staff, some neighbors, and a few friends she had made along the way. The mayor came. So did the woman whose mother's ashes Helen had helped carry. So did the teenager, now a young man in college, who had learned to say, "Thank you." They gave speeches. They shared memories. They laughed and cried and hugged. At the end of the gathering, The mayor unveiled something near the front entrance of the building. It was a small bronze plaque, mounted on the wall beside the doors Helen had unlocked thousands of times. The plaque read, "Because sometimes, being seen is the only thing a person needs to keep going." Beneath it, in smaller letters, she made a simple request. "We were not ready, but we are, now." Helen stood in front of the plaque for a long time. She traced her finger over the words. Her words. Words that had started as a whisper and grown into something that changed an entire town. She thought about all the invisible people out there. The ones still waiting to be seen. The ones still wondering if they mattered. And she hoped that somewhere, someone would make another simple request. Because that is how the world changes. Not with grand gestures or famous speeches, but with small moments of kindness. With one person, brave enough to ask. With one name learned. One hello spoken. One heart seen. Helen smiled, wiped her eyes, and walked out the doors of the community center for the last time. But her story did not end there. It never will. Because every time someone learns the name of a person who serves them, every time someone says thank you to a stranger, every time someone chooses to see the invisible, Helen's request lives on. And that is the most beautiful kind of forever.